Everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica and our season on the Hyper Neo Geo 64. Today we're going to be taking a look at Beastbusters Second Nightmare, released in 1998. It is my absolute favorite game on the platform. Before we get too far into talking about the game itself, if you could do us a huge favor, go down below and hit like and subscribe. It took a ton of work to get this onto the screen. If you've seen our On a Technicality season, you'll see all the soldering work and part selection needed to convert this game over to JAMA so we can show it to you guys. So if you could hit like and subscribe, we'd definitely appreciate it. Interestingly enough, this is one of the only games that I ever encountered in the wild for the Hyper Neo Geo 64. I was in Vail, Colorado at the US Free Skiing Open, staying at a hotel, and when I went to the game room, this game was sitting there, ready to play. I had never heard of the Hyper Neo Geo 64 before. I did know about the AES and MVS, but this was a game and system that I had never heard of, so of course I threw some quarters in, and I absolutely fell in love with it. This game is amazing. Basically, the premise is you are a team of commandos and you're going into a hospital where an infection has been unleashed, turning all the inhabitants into monsters. Basically, it's your infected hospital kind of horror trope. But the destruction of the zombies here in this first stage of the game hooked me completely when I started playing this game. You've got great 3D effects, all the enemies are destructible, the blood effects are amazing, arms pop off, legs pop off, spines become exposed. As you play through the game more and more, you're going to see just how good the gore in this game really is. As well as being 3D, there is a lot of sprite work as well, and that's something that the Hyper Neo Geo 64 was very capable of. Not only did it render in full 3D, but it had so much memory for 2D sprites and the capability to push those around. You get a really nice mix of giant sprites and 3D effects. I know we mentioned in the intro video, but the fun thing about the Hyper Neo Geo 64 is that the main CPU is identical to what was used in the Nintendo 64, so maybe with a lot of work you could convert this over to the Nintendo 64. I'm definitely not going to try it, but you totally could. But aesthetic-wise, you get kind of these like punk zombies on these motorcycles. They shoot in. You have that kind of like anarchist spray paint on the wall there. So the game definitely has a good sense of humor, even though it is completely gory and it's not campy like the original Beastbusters, which, while that had a sense of humor as well, that game was definitely much tamer by comparison. Now going with the first boss here, you just have a giant tentacle monster. I don't know what else is underground there, you just get to see the tentacles, but it's a really fun kind of gameplay element. In the original Beastbusters, you were able to fight a zombie jeep, and here you're fighting a tentacled bus. So I think that is definitely something that's worth checking out. Well, as far as finding this game in the wild is concerned, I don't think you ever would be able to. The cabinet was gigantic and it had two huge cabinet-mounted turret guns on it. It's actually not a light gun game. It uses X and Y coordinates, as you saw in that On a Technicality video. We were able to convert a flight stick over to control the game itself because it doesn't use any optical sensors. So the cabinet was huge. There was a lot of motors in it for the guns. They broke a lot. People didn't treat them nicely. So if you see one of these cabinets in the wild, absolutely play it because you're probably never going to see one again. It took me a year of active searching to actually find this game, and I had to buy the game and motherboard separately and put them together. Thankfully they all worked after I was able to massage those into using the JAMA standard, but really it's an extremely rare game, because as we mentioned earlier, the Hyper Neo Geo 64 was a complete failure of a platform, and it really never got used much, so the cabinets aren't really that prevalent in the wild. So now we're on to the second stage. This game has a little bit of a boss rush feel to it. You're definitely going to be encountering a lot of bosses, especially towards the end of the game. The stages themselves, some stages are fully featured, others just kind of have like maybe a minute's worth of gameplay before you go into the next boss fight, which we're encountering now. I don't exactly know what it is. It looks like some sort of giant spider crab. Let's just say that a spider in the basement of the hospital got infected with whatever got out, and now we are fighting him. But, I mean, as far as the gameplay difficulty is concerned, it is an arcade game for sure, and it definitely wants to take your quarters. I set this on medium difficulty, and I got completely destroyed my entire playthrough. I don't remember it being that hard when I played when I found it in the early 2000s, but really my memory of that entire trip is very vague, so who knows. But now we're on to the main hospital stage, and we get these great zombies in these white lab coats. And then you're going to get the pink nurses coming in very shortly. And I do love what they did with all the characters. There's a lot of different personalities going on. If you pause the gameplay, if you pause my video, you can see that all the faces are really well drawn in, and everything looks appropriately gory. Comparing this to something like House of the Dead, which came out the same year, this game has way more straight horror elements to it. I mean, obviously, House of the Dead had zombies, and it was definitely a horror game, but there was kind of that campy Sega tongue-in-cheek attitude towards the gameplay itself, where ADK, the main developer on this game, just went for the brass ring of gore. You saw that zombie doctor just crawling from the ceiling with his spine dangling out. That, to me, just looks absolutely incredible as far as graphics are concerned. I will say that the textures on this game and all the Hyper Neo Geo games in general are definitely pixelated though. The hardware, I'm not sure if it's capable of actually having smooth textures. None of the games really feature that, so I'm highly assuming that they weren't enabled on the hardware level. But obviously the interesting thing about the Hyper Neo Geo 64 is that no one really knows exactly what the GPU inside of it is, so guessing at that hardware is really difficult. But I would definitely say that it's more impressive visually than something like the Nintendo 64, although like I said, the textures aren't as great. I don't know that you'd be able to push this many polygons around at 60 frames a second with all these characters on screen if you had this as a home conversion on a platform that wasn't the Hyper Neo Geo 64, but that's kind of just, a guess, because this hardware was supposed to come home as a CD-based console, but it never did, so the only way you can play this game is by using an original board. It does emulate on MAME, it is quite poor, and the audio will just give you a splitting headache. So definitely if you want to absolutely check this game out, you can emulate it, but just make sure you turn your headphones way down or don't listen to the audio, because otherwise your ears will definitely, probably literally bleed by listening to it. Hopefully the emulation gets better moving forward, but right now it's definitely dicey. I love this boss here. Kind of reminds me of one of the House of the Dead enemies, the first boss in the House of the Dead as well. It's kind of how they swing that arm around, but I love when he dies, his body, it just explodes and all his intestines come shooting straight out of his torso. There's definitely a lot of love and attention put into this game, even with these little, kind of 3D render line drawings there of the hospital. All the transitions have a lot of work in them, and I definitely would say that as far as like the complete doneness of Hyper Neo Geo 64 games are concerned, this one feels like maybe it took the longest time or had the most attention paid to it. But then again, I am 100% impartial, because this game to me is just like nostalgic arcade experience. But like I said, you do get beat up a lot. That area there particularly seems unfair. You have 5 projectile shooting zombies all hitting you at once. But I love these enemies. Sometimes you just see things for one instance. You got those 2 zombies stuck in the bee hives, and then you get into this room here and you have all these doctors and nurses eating something off that table. And that just happens once. It's a one and done scene, and I love that they were able to kind of incorporate those little details. Just like this little garbage chute area here, you have to shoot those fan blades out when you fall into the sewer so you don't get hurt. Now the weird thing about this game music-wise is that now that we're in the sewers, there really isn't any music playing, and some of the levels just don't have music. Now, I don't remember playing this, that much when I played it in the early 2000s to remember what soundtrack was playing and when, but I don't know if there's an issue with my game or they just didn't program music in that particular area. But now we have those same zombies falling down like we did in the beginning of the game, and I do love that verticality. And then when you kill these little, I'm going to call them nematodes, like from Doug, all the blood splatters all over the wall. It doesn't stay forever. They didn't have enough memory to keep all those textures up at once, but it definitely has a really nice effect to it. And now that we're falling into the sewer, we're going to fight the giant nematode. I'll actually just let you guys watch this battle. It's a really funny character, and I'll be back in like 30 seconds just to finish up talking about Beastbusters' Second Nightmare. And the giant nematode is dead. God, he's got some great teeth on him. He might be a zombie, but those things are all straight and pretty white. Compared to all the other death animations, though, he just falls over backwards, and it's funny to me. It just kind of like gives up completely and says, no, that's it. I'm done for the day. And like I said earlier, like this is a big, gigantic boss rush. That boss ends, and we go right into the final stage, which is the final boss. This giant magma-looking monster claw crab guy that just comes out of the hospital itself and leaves that gigantic crater. That city is absolutely ruined, and when you see the ending, you're going to see exactly how bad it really gets. As far as final bosses are concerned, definitely fun, definitely challenging, but does have a nice fairness to it, and I do appreciate that from a gameplay perspective. But like I said, This game has a weird mix of bosses to actual gameplay stages. I wish that there was a little bit more gameplay in the stages themselves, or I wish that the game was slightly longer. This is going to be like a 32-minute gameplay sequence. I will upload the full playthrough. That way there's a full 1080p 60 playthrough on YouTube, and you'll see how long it takes. But as far as the length of it's concerned, it's a short experience even for an arcade game. But there you go. This gigantic, horribly textured, giant pixelated meteor, I think, comes in, destroys the boss, and you have won the game. But take my word for it. If you find this game in the wild, absolutely play it. It is my favorite light gun style game from that era of arcade games. Short of that, we'll be back next week with some more Hyper Neo Geo 64 stuff. But go ahead down below, hit that like and subscribe button. It definitely helps us out. We hope you guys have a great weekend. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.